The right to protest and express dissent comes with certain duties and responsibilities. Protests cannot be held anytime and anywhere, the Supreme Court has said in an order, dismissing a review petition on the anti-citizenship law protest held in Delhi Shaheen Bagh in 2019. The right to protest cannot be anytime and anywhere. There may be some spontaneous protests, but in the case of prolonged dissent or protest, there cannot be continued occupation of public places affecting rights of others. A three-judge bench of Justices S.K. Kaul, Aniruddha Bose and Krishna Murari said, as it declined to review its last year's order, that the occupation of public ways during the anti-CAA protests at Shaheen Bagh was not acceptable. Now, though the review petition was decided on the 9th of February, the order came late last night, and the three-judge bench reiterated that public places cannot be occupied for protests and that public protests must be in designated areas alone. Remember, Delhi's Shaheen Bagh had emerged as the epicenter of anti-CAA protests in 2019, where the protesters, mostly women and children, sat for more than 3 months. Now, the Shaheen Bagh protests had received worldwide attention too, and Time magazine even honoured 82-year-old Bilkis Dadi, the face of the movement, as one of the 100 most influential people of 2020. But we're focusing here back home, we're asking tonight, will the Supreme Court order have far-reaching consequences? Joining us now, we have Karuna Nandi, advocate of the Supreme Court, and Ashutosh Srivastava, also both of them advocates of the Supreme Court on different sides, I think I can safely say, of the ideological divide. And then we have Yogendra Yadav, National President of Swaraj India. Ashutosh Srivastava, to you first. You have a pro-government leaning. So how do you read into this order? What do you read into this order in the context of the farmers' protests, which have now been going on for over 3 months now, perhaps longer than the CAA protests?
Yes, Steve, this is basically about the Supreme Court's order. It is not about the government. It is basically the Supreme Court order which was passed last year on 7th of October 2020 when this petition for Shaheen Bagh protest was heard.
Sure.
Supreme Court had an observation that the public ways and the public spaces cannot be occupied by the protesters indefinitely, because on one hand, obviously the protesters have certain rights, but they have the duties also, because they should not violate the rights of the other commuters, because other citizens of India, they also have their certain rights. If they are stopped or they are not allowed to walk through or go through certain ways, that will be, a kind of, violation to the fundamental rights of the people who have been stopped or who are not being allowed to walk through those roads or to commute through those roads. So this was the finding. Now, this order was basically challenged before the same bench of the Supreme Court by filing a review petition by some of the petitioners. Now, the Supreme Court again confirmed the same order passed on 7th of October last year, stating that there
So, Ashutosh, this is the background. We're aware of that. I'm asking, going forward in the context of the farmers' protests, how do you see this playing out? Because all court orders, it sets a precedence.
See, Supreme Court doesn't say that there should not be any protest, but Supreme Court says that the protest should be on the designated areas where the permissions have been given, where the permissions have been sought. And it should not disturb or it should not violate the fundamental rights of the other citizens of the country.
Sure,
they should not be disturbed.
An important point, you say that they should demonstrate only in designated areas.
Yes.
But what if
Absolutely.
permission is not given in the area that you want to protest in? Karuna Nandi, you specialize in constitutional law, correct? Now, if the Supreme Court orders protesters should demonstrate only in designated areas chosen by the administration, can protests be confined to a designated place? Is that constitutional?
I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head, because my friend who was speaking before me was speaking about the difficulty to pedestrians, for example, and that's one of the big arguments. Traffic and difficulty to pedestrians, right? That is spoken of when you counter somebody's right to protest. Now, with regard to the international law on this issue, and many of our judgments speak of the fact that where we are parties to a particular treaty, and we are, of course, parties to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and to the ICCPR, Article 19, it says that the incursion on the limit to the right of assembly and the right to protest must be in the law. It must be, and there is no law on this. There's 144, but that's a restriction. It must be necessary and it must be proportionate, right? It must be for a legitimate goal. That legitimate goal, what if it is public order? Now let's go to it. In articulating this right, the UN Special Rapporteur has said that blanket bans, including bans on the exercise of the right entirely or any exercise of the right in specific places or at particular times, are intrinsically disproportionate, right? It also says that you must look that assemblies are an equally legitimate use of public space as commercial activity or the movement of vehicles and pedestrian traffic. Any use of public space requires some measure of coordination to protect different interests, but there are many legitimate ways in which individuals may use public spaces. A certain level of disruption to ordinary life caused by assemblies, including disruption of traffic, annoyance, and even harm to commercial activities, must be tolerated if the right is not to be deprived of its substance. For this reason, and because it goes, I believe that this judgment goes against the Himmatlal judgment, which is a judgment of 5 judges, which speaks of the inability of the state to take away the right of assembly or prohibiting assembly on every public street or every public place.
Let me just play devil's advocate.
It must go to the Constitution.
So, for example, I just looked up the ACLU's website where, you know, they give, we're talking about the US, right? So they give, they tell protesters, know your rights where you can protest.
We can if we're talking about the ACLU. But when I talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we're talking about...
We are signatory to that. I agree. But all I'm saying is on the ground, if you look at the ACLU's website where it says know your rights where you can protest, it says certain locations are off limits for all demonstrations, including Capitol Steps, the Vietnam Memorial, Washington Monument, Plaza in front of the Supreme Court. So from the government's point of view, and it says rules for protesting outside the White House generally are more restrictive than in other areas of DC. So from the government's point of view, does the government also not have to ensure that certain places, prominent places, are off limits? And we saw what happened in the US in Capitol Hill. Given that, in that context, can you give them benefit of doubt to the order?
See, if we were speaking about protests that were too close to Rashtrapati Bhavan.
Well, the farmers want to march to the capital, no? They want to march to Parliament.
So let's think about this, right? At the moment, what's happening is that they are limiting protest at the Singhu border itself, right? They've cut off electricity.
Yes.
They've cut off water. They have put out barriers to prevent them from even entering.
Which are inconveniencing the public too. All right, let's get Yogendra Yadav. Yes. The police themselves inconvenience the public, but Yogendra Yadav, if I can come across to you, you would be probably what the Prime Minister now describes as an Andolan Jeevi, people who apparently cannot live without protest, and I bet you probably bear that tag with pride. But if I can just ask for your first gut reaction to this order, that
I'll step aside the hyper-legal debate, partly because Ms. Mandi has put it much better than I could, and partly because I can't help smile when I read these orders and so on, how far removed they are from the reality on the ground. Now, the Constitution of India gives us right to protest. It is not an unlimited right. It comes with riders. Completely unexceptionable. Where is the problem? I don't need to hear this from the Supreme Court every day. That's not the real issue. The real issue is that in a concrete instance, how do you exercise that right? And I say with complete sense of responsibility that all this sweet talk about please go protest in designated places, this does not exist on the ground at all. I challenge you now. Please go and file a petition, a simple application in Parliament Street Station, one of the best police stations of this country, and say, I want to protest for the following reasons with 200 people or whatever, and then wait to see the drama. We have organized it. We had 1 lakh farmers waiting in Delhi. This is 2 years ago. And till 2 in the morning of the day when 1 lakh farmers were to march towards Jantar Mantar, the designated place, we did not have the permission. And at the end, they did not give us a written permission, said, kar lena, rokenge nahi hum aapko. This is in the heart of the capital, and this is not one exceptional case. This happens every single time.
And so will this order empower the police more to crack down on legitimate voices of protests, right? Especially if your protesters perhaps coming from vulnerable sections of social strata. But Yogendra Yadav, if I could play devil's advocate again, let me ask you, the Supreme Court order says the dissent should not come in the way of the public's right to free movement, right? We've all grown up, we've seen days where you've heard of bunds and, you know, parents are fearful about sending their children to school. There's a loss to the economy, rail rocos, ambulances not able to get someone who's dying in need of medical help. We've seen those headlines. And, you know, I think the farmers' protests are planning to have a rail roko andolan also, I think, on the 18th of February.
Sarah, these are absolutely legitimate considerations. Of course, commuters should not be troubled. Of course, ambulances should have the way. But what I'm trying to say is...
Which the farmers' protests have ensured.
Yes, we have.
Over the past 3 months.
Utmost importance to that. And any minor lapse is something that we must be held accountable to. But the simple point I'm making, Sarah, is this. What you don't have is an enabling protocol in this country for me to realize this elementary right. It is enshrined in the Constitution, but it has to be implemented by the SHO. Would the Supreme Court of India please kindly issue a set of simple guidelines which enable me as a citizen to proactively realize a right which has been given to me with all the precautions? And I'm saying with all seriousness, me lords, this right does not exist on the ground. The local SHO will speak to the local minister or the local politician. And yes, if the ruling party wants to organize a protest to incite mob violence, they will get permission. If you
Ashutosh Srivastav, please respond.
We will not get permission. And last thing,
protests should only be held in designated sites, but permissions aren't granted when people want to protest at the Jantar Mantar at more central locations. Sorry, Mr. Yadav, go ahead.
Even the Supreme Court's own interventions have been so varied. What they say on Shaheen Bagh has one tenor. What they say about farmers' protest in the month of December has another tenor. What they say about the same farmers' protest in the month of January has a different tenor. Where do I go? This is the last resort option I have in this country. Can I expect a consistent treatment across whatever, whether public opinion is for or against?
Ashutosh Srivastav, Karuna touched on this. You've not given permission to protest where you want to, where you can have an impact. Police too have been putting up barricades, barbed wire, nails on the ground. That is disrupting traffic more than the farmers' protests are. 3 months they have been violence-free, except for what happened on Republic Day, inconveniencing the Aam Aadmi, the police possibly doing that. Protests should not become a nuisance, but there are so many reports, we've covered this on NDTV, of locals supporting the protests, locals providing them food and water.
Right. See, I would say that today's Supreme Court order, it doesn't give any contradictory or anything which was not earlier in the law. Earlier also, the permissions were sought from the police department. So Supreme Court has not changed anything to that effect. It is as good as it was earlier. Now, this order, what we are talking about today, is the review order which has been rejected. The order was already passed in October last year. And even after that, the Supreme Court had permitted the farmers to have the protests on certain conditions, that they should not violate the rights of others. They should not indefinitely, occupy the spaces which are meant for the other people also.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes. You see, what I want to say here is that, yes, we are talking about human rights, but there cannot be human rights only for a set of people. The human rights has to be considered for the other set of people also, who may not be,
I want to get a last word in from Karuna Nandi. I'm out of time, but Karuna, Ashutosh Srivastav, points out that this was a review petition. It was heard again. The original order was passed weeks ago.
Yes.
But is it normal that a review bench comprises of the same judges who deliver the original judgment? Or is that curious? Or
that's the rule, actually, Sarah. That the review must go to the same judges if they're available. And the review jurisdiction is very limited, that you can only correct the error on the face of the record. My problem is, I have no quarrel with the review being more or less similar to the judgment, because I think it is the ratio of the judgment that I have deep disagreements with, primarily because the ratio of the judgment in October goes against the Himmatlal judgment, which is a constitution bench and 5 judges. What does the Himmatlal judgment say? It says the state cannot by law abridge or take away the right of assembly by prohibiting assembly on every public street or public place. The state can only make regulations in aid of the right of assembly of each citizen and can only impose reasonable restrictions in the interest of public order. So only if the protest is the spark in a powder keg that sparks some kind of violence that is not like one person assaulting another, but it's like a riot or something large like that, can the state impose such restrictions. The type of blanket restriction that has crept in to the Shaheen Bagh judgment is against our constitution.
And neither has Shaheen Bagh nor have the farmers' protests broken out into any violence except for what happened on Republic Day. But thank you all for joining us. And I guess we could just end by saying, where would we be without the Arab Spring? Remember, that protest went on for 3 years, I think, but it certainly changed the course of history all across the world. So can you put a time limit on protests and how long you can protest if you're a protester? Thank you all for joining us.